Israel and its allies are preparing for a strike by Iran after the death of a senior Hamas official last week in Tehran. We talked a little bit about this off the top. President Biden met with his national security team at the White House Situation Room on Monday. The Pentagon has also sent additional aircraft and warships to the Middle East to help defend Israel. Earlier, Secretary of State Antony Blinken called it a critical moment.
We are engaged in intense diplomacy, pretty much round the clock, with a very simple message. All parties must refrain from escalation.
CBS News foreign correspondent Debora Patta is in East Jerusalem as concerns of a wider conflict in the Middle East run high. Deborah?
The war drums are certainly getting louder in this region. Following Ismail Haniyeh's assassination, Tehran says Israel must be punished for what it calls its cowardly attack on Iranian soil. Both Israel and Iran say they don't want this to escalate, but nobody wants to be the first to take a step back. Former Israeli diplomat to the U.S., Alon Pincus, says the most worrying scenario is a 360-degree attack involving Hezbollah in Lebanon, Iran from the east, and the Houthis in Yemen. He's concerned that in the Israeli government, there are no cool heads prevailing at the moment, saying the last thing America wants is a scenario in which they are dragged into a conflict, particularly during an election year. But support for Israel remains ironclad. U.S. General Michael Kurilla, who helped coordinate the defense of Israel during the Iranian attack in April, when more than 300 missiles and drones were fired, was back here today meeting with Israel's defense minister. The U.S. still believes the best way to prevent this from spiraling out of control is a ceasefire in Gaza. And there are high levels of anxiety here, but for many Israelis, life simply goes on. There's still an all-out effort internationally to prevent this from escalating, but one mistake, Jeff, could be lethal.
Debora Patta, thank you. CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe joins me now. Ed, how is the White House preparing for what's next between Iran and Israel?
Jeff, good to be with you. The president, the vice president, and their top national security advisors wrapped up a meeting of several hours at the White House this afternoon going over the potential threats to what's going on in the Middle East. We know, for example, that there's grave concern about the situation at the Iraqi air base that you were reporting on earlier today, and that word of that seemed to come as this meeting was breaking up. We also know the Secretary of State has been on the phone with various officials through the weekend, including the Prime Minister of Iraq. The Deputy White House National Security Advisor told us yesterday on Face the Nation, for example, that they've been in touch with leaders of Jordan, reaching out through intermediaries to folks in Iran as well to try to stave off some kind of an escalation in Lebanon or along the northern front of Israel, which of course would be probably the biggest concern at this point, because that would essentially open up this war to even more players and to Iranian proxies.
As far as the ceasefire deal, I mean, this sort of gets lost in all this as tensions escalate, but I know the White House is still hoping for a ceasefire. Where does that stand, Ed? Yeah,
I mean, we know, for example, that the president had a pretty spirited conversation with President Biden, or with the Israeli Prime Minister last week, to go over the particulars, and was reportedly pushing him to try to get a deal in the next week to 2 weeks in order to, turn down the temperature and get those people freed and hopefully avoid a wider conflict. But then that conversation came just days after the leaders of Hezbollah and Hamas, those senior leaders, were killed in Beirut and Tehran. And that's what's causing now the concern about the potential escalation of this. We have U.S. naval vessels being moved into the region with more air power on the potential threat of Iranian attacks or attacks from their proxies. So all of it, in essence, is interconnected. What you're seeing tonight in Iraq is probably being caused by proxies of Iran, or at least that would be one theory, because that's who's done it before. Is that part of the retaliation? There's concern about the northern front between Israel and Lebanon. There's concern about what the Houthis could do. All of it could cause this to just blow up in the coming days. And it's why the White House, at least today, was so focused on trying to avoid that from happening, and why we'll likely hear that the President, the Secretary of State, and others are continuing to work the phones to not only get that ceasefire and hostage deal, but also keep these parties from causing a wider war.
Okay, Ed, you'll keep watching it. Thanks very much.